Britain spends more fighting water than almost any other environmental threat. The government's annual flood defense budget has climbed past £1.3 billion, part of an aggressive, historic capital investment campaign exceeding £10.5 billion aimed at reinforcing flood walls, deeper channels, and pumping stations that grow taller each decade. Yet flooding worsens every year. Homes untouched for generations flood twice or 3 times in a decade. Roads vanish under floodwater within hours. Insurance claims soar. Villages evacuate repeatedly within the same 5 years. The more Britain builds, the more it floods. Then, almost overnight, the same rivers run low by summer. Farmlands submerged in winter cracks under July heat. Reservoirs shrink to reveal mudflats untouched for years. Hosepipe bans spread across regions with some of Europe's highest rainfall. It's a paradox no official can fully explain. A nation simultaneously drowning and parched, spending more each year even as its rivers grow less able to regulate themselves. Something deeper than engineering is broken, because the engineering keeps expanding, and so does the crisis beside it. Amid this worsening national picture, something strange has been happening on one river in Devon, and few outside a small circle of scientists understood why. Water has begun slowing in ways that defy expectations for a lowland English river during storms. Pools have formed where the channel once ran fast and shallow. Floodplain sections dry for generations are turning green and marshy again. Flood peaks downstream are shrinking, not growing, even as storms elsewhere intensify. A river, seemingly on its own, is undoing centuries of change. The obvious explanations don't hold up. No flood defense scheme was commissioned here, no contractor has logged work, no reservoir or basin has been built nearby. Rainfall patterns haven't shifted enough to explain slower peaks or spreading wetland. One by one, investigators eliminate every conventional answer. That absence of explanation is what transforms an obscure anomaly into a genuine mystery. Because if nothing human changed, something else did, and no one yet had a name for it. The first person to notice physical evidence was a Devon wildlife ranger named Tom Harris. He'd spent years monitoring these riverbanks after repeated flooding, logging water levels for a local river authority losing its own slow, costly battle against the water. He knew this stretch of the River Otter better than anyone. Then, on an ordinary autumn morning, walking a bank he'd walked 100 times, he stopped before something inexplicable. A willow tree nearly as thick as his waist lay felled across the stream at a deliberate angle, its bark stripped in long, precise grooves. Downstream, a barrier of woven branches and packed mud spanned the channel where, a week earlier, only shallow current had run. Behind it, a still, glassy pool had formed, deep enough to swallow his boot when he waded in. There were no chainsaw marks, no tire tracks, no sign any human crew had been near in months. Whatever built this had done so overnight, with precision no construction team could match using only what the riverbank provided. He filmed it on his phone, half convinced it was an elaborate prank, and reported it anyway. Within days, similar reports arrived from elsewhere along the river. More felled trees, more unexplained pools, more reshaped banks, all built by something no one had actually witnessed. Trail cameras soon went up along the water's edge, aimed at the mysterious dam, waiting to finally catch whatever was responsible in the act. The footage that returned weeks later didn't just answer the question, it rewrote the entire investigation's premise. Moving through the infrared frame at dusk was an animal not officially documented living wild in England for nearly 400 years. A thick-set, broad-tailed creature dragging branches toward the dam with the unhurried confidence of something that had done this exact task for generations. A family group, an adult pair, and two young kits trailing behind through the shallows. The Eurasian beaver, hunted to extinction in Britain by the 16th century, had somehow returned to this river. Without asking permission from a single government agency, it had begun rebuilding a wetland Devon hadn't seen in centuries. The mystery didn't end there, it only changed shape. Nobody could immediately explain where these beavers had come from. Escaped from a private collection, deliberately released without authorization, or arrived some other way. A question that would remain quiet speculation for years, never fully resolved. But a more urgent question mattered to the scientists now taking up the case. If this animal really was responsible for the changes Tom Harris and others had documented, what exactly was it doing to the water? Could it explain the shrinking flood peaks and reappearing wetlands hydrologists had already begun measuring downstream? In 2015, a small consortium of researchers, hydrologists, ecologists, and university scientists working alongside the Devon Wildlife Trust, launched a formal investigation that would come to be known as the Devon Beaver Trial. Their approach was deliberately cautious. They were not setting out to prove that beavers were good for the landscape. They were setting out to measure, with as much rigor as the site allowed, exactly what was happening in the water, in the soil, and in the wildlife populations around it, and to let the evidence lead wherever it led, regardless of the conclusion. Camera traps tracked the animals' nocturnal building schedules along the dam sites. Drones mapped new pools and channels as they formed and reformed, sometimes changing shape within days of a heavy rain. Satellite imagery from before the beavers' arrival was cross-referenced against fresh aerial captures, revealing patches of wetland vegetation spreading outward from the dam complexes like ink bleeding slowly into paper. Hydrological sensors installed upstream and downstream of the beaver-built structures logged flow rates second by second through storm events, allowing researchers to directly compare how quickly water moved through an engineered dam system versus an unmodified stretch of channel only a short distance away. And systematic biodiversity surveys began counting fish, amphibians, invertebrates, and birds across the site, measuring the beaver wetlands against untouched control sections of the same river. What the data revealed, compiled across the trial's first 3 years, surprised even the researchers who had designed the study expecting only modest results. Water voles, one of Britain's fastest declining native mammals, began reappearing in the dense reeds surrounding the ponds, drawn to cover that offered protection from predators they could not evade in open water. Otters, already present on the river, started hunting more frequently around the new pools, where fish congregated in numbers unseen in the faster channel sections nearby. Dragonfly and damselfly diversity around the wetland more than doubled within a few seasons, feeding on an explosion of aquatic insect life the still water now supported. Wetland bird species, snipe, teal, gray wagtails, began turning up on survey sheets after years of absence. Something that looked, on paper, like a modest hydrological anomaly was in fact the reappearance of an entire ecosystem few believed this stretch of Devon could still support. But it was the flood data that mattered most to people who had never given a beaver a second thought in their lives, the residents of villages nearby who braced every winter for the next disaster. Researchers compared storm event flow measurements from before and after the dam complex was established, and the pattern held up again and again. Water moving through the beaver-engineered section of river reached peak flow measurably later than water moving through unmodified channels close by. buffered by a network of ponds and side channels that absorbed the initial surge and released it gradually over hours instead of minutes. Peak flood discharge downstream of the dams dropped by a significant margin during the storms studied. And through the dry months of subsequent summers, while surrounding farmland browned and cracked under the sun, the wetland the beavers had built stayed conspicuously green, sustained by groundwater the dams had helped recharge months earlier. A rodent most people would barely glance at twice, slow-moving, thick-set, faintly comical as it waddled along a muddy bank, had, without a single planning application or engineering budget, built a flood and drought buffer that government agencies spend tens of millions of pounds trying to replicate with concrete, steel, and pumping stations. And once the researchers understood that, the real subject of this investigation finally came into focus, because the beaver itself was never really the mystery's final answer. It was only the trigger for something larger. The Devon team was really capturing what ecologists call ecosystem engineering, a chain reaction in which a single species' routine, intuitive behavior reshapes the physical structure of a whole area. A dam inhibits the movement of water. Slower water deposits the silt it brings, resulting in rich soil rather than washing it downstream. The neighboring field's water table is recharged by settled silt and moist soils. Rising groundwater reconnects the river to a floodplain that has been blocked off for generations. Reconnected floodplains spread into new wetlands. New wetlands support a wider range of plant life. A wider range of plants supports an explosion of insects. More insects mean better fish habitat, which draws birds and mammals that had abandoned the area decades earlier. No single event restores the ecosystem. The process itself, cascading outward from one felled willow tree, does the rebuilding, a mechanism this small research team was watching unfold in something close to real time, effectively rerunning an ecological relationship that had shaped British rivers for millennia before it was interrupted. To understand why that connection collapsed, the investigators must look well beyond the River Otter and into a story that predates any historical history of Britain's waterways. For thousands of years following the last ice age, lowland England was not the landscape of neat fields and straight ditches that we know today. Every winter, it was a patchwork of wetlands, water meadows, and sluggish, meandering rivers that extended over floodplains, soaking into peat and silt like a living sponge, absorbing rainwater gradually and slowly, releasing it throughout the dry months. That system supported a level of species nearly unthinkable today, all propelled by water moving at nature's own speed. From the Roman occupation through the Tudor and Georgian eras, into the agricultural expansion of the 18th and 19th centuries, that landscape was dismantled piece by piece. Wetlands were drained for farmland, accelerating after enclosure acts turned common marshland into private fields. Rivers were straightened to clear floodwater quickly. Floodplains were cut off from the rivers that once fed them, hemmed in by raised banks so farmers could plant to the water's edge without fear of a wet spring. Each decision made sense on its own terms. Nobody was trying to break Britain's water system only to grow more food and tame land that seemed unruly and wasted. Within that same unraveling, one species vanished almost unnoticed. The Eurasian beaver had lived in British rivers longer than humans had occupied the island in organized settlements. But its fur was warm, its meat edible, and a compound in its scent glands was believed medicinal. Hunted relentlessly, it disappeared from England by the 16th century and from the rest of Britain soon after. Nobody understood what they were losing because nobody yet understood what this animal did to a river beyond building dams. It would take 400 years, a string of unrelated modern floods, and one ordinary morning on the River Otter before anyone connected these threads again. By 2020, what the Devon beaver trial revealed had outgrown a single stretch of countryside. The Environment Agency put average annual UK flood damage well over £1 billion, with worse years multiplying that toll across homes, businesses, and farmland. Drought years added their own costs, crop losses, irrigation restrictions, and emergency water transfers running tens of millions annually. Against that backdrop, the River Otter's economics looked almost absurd. The Beavers had built their entire wetland complex at no public cost. No contractors, no engineering fees, no budget beyond modest monitoring. A comparable government flood scheme might cost millions and still fail to deliver the same drought resilience these animals provided incidentally just by building somewhere to live. That contrast, millions spent fighting a symptom versus a free natural process resolving the cause, became one of the trial's most persuasive arguments, and it didn't stay confined to Devon. Similar beaver projects appeared across English catchments through the early 2020s in Yorkshire, Cornwall, and the Midlands, each testing whether the otter's results could be replicated. In 2022, the Eurasian beaver gained legal protection as a native species, formal recognition for an animal that had returned uninvited, and quietly rewritten a decades-old argument among hydrologists and engineers. But nothing this significant unfolds without friction, and no honest account of it ends in simple triumph. As beaver populations expanded along the River Otter and beyond, some landowners began reporting real and legitimate problems. Dams occasionally flooded low-lying farm fields that had never flooded before. Burrowing activity along riverbanks weakened sections of agricultural drainage systems farmers depended on to keep their land workable. For some, the return of a species celebrated in wildlife documentaries and government press releases looked, from their own kitchen window, like an uninvited flood risk showing up on their property without so much as a warning letter. Calls to remove the animals resurfaced periodically, echoing, in miniature, the very hunting pressure that had erased beavers from Britain the first time around. The response from conservationists and hydrologists working the trial was not to dismiss these complaints, but to treat them as an engineering problem with engineering solutions. Flow devices, pipes installed through dams to regulate water levels without destroying the structure entirely, allowed ponds to be maintained at heights that avoided flooding nearby fields while preserving the wetland habitat behind them. Dam notching, wire mesh protection for vulnerable drainage infrastructure, and closer coordination between conservation trusts and individual farmers turned outright conflict into a slower, more negotiated coexistence. It remains, in many catchments, an ongoing and sometimes tense negotiation between an ecological process that does not ask permission and a human landscape built on the assumption that every acre answers to someone's deed. The challenge, researchers on the trial came to understand, was never really ecological. Beavers know exactly how to build a functioning wetland. The harder question was always going to be social, whether people, after 4 centuries without this animal in their landscape, could relearn how to share a river with it. Today, the wetland Tom Harris stumbled onto that autumn morning has grown far beyond the single dam he first filmed on his phone. Where there was once a fast, unremarkable stretch of stream, there is now a living network of pools, channels, and marsh, dense with birdsong absent from this valley for most of his career. He still walks the bank most weeks, and he still checks the cameras, though the shock of those early days has settled into something quieter. A kind of ongoing attentiveness to a landscape that keeps rewriting itself according to a logic older than any flood defense plan ever drafted in Whitehall. Nobody involved in the Devon trial believes beavers alone will solve every flood and every drought this country will face as the climate continues to shift. But the argument itself has changed permanently. For decades, Britain answered its water problems with more concrete, deeper channels, higher walls, treating every flood as an engineering failure to be corrected with better engineering. The River Otter suggests a different question. One this documentary leaves open rather than answered, because the mystery is still unfolding on riverbanks across the country as you watch this. What if the most sophisticated flood control system Britain ever had wasn't something that needed to be built at all, but something that only needed to be allowed back in? If this mystery pulled you in, please subscribe, because the River Otter is only one watershed, and there are entire nations worth of hidden engineers like this one still waiting to be discovered.